Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. In the second pod recorded at the eWorld Trade Fair, we take a look back at what has happened so far in 2022, as well as a look forward to the second half of this remarkable year. The gas squeeze following Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a central part of not just the energy crisis, but also the current global macroeconomic woes. Our guest this week will talk us through the key drivers in LNG, gas, the Nordic and the environmental markets. So joining me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss these issues are Olav Vilnes, editor Norway. A warm welcome to you, Olav.
Thank you.
Andres Cala, our LNG correspondent. A warm welcome to you, Andres.
Thank you. Good morning.
And last but not least, Tasmin Chowdhary, environmental markets reporter. Hello, Tasmin.
Hello, Richard. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'd like to start off maybe talking to you, Olav, and asking you about the past 6 months. How would you summarize what's happened so far since the start of the year?
Extraordinary is probably the best word to use. It's been extremely. Price levels you've never seen anything similar across European power markets, and I've been following particularly the Nordic market, which have seen prices closely following what's happening in Germany. I mean, Germany is leading the way due to the gas problems, and then you have the Nordic prices averaging, at least in the southern part of that region, very close to the price levels we see in Germany. I think we have an average this year so far of 115 euros at the Nordic system price level. And if you look at the southern price zones, you have prices that are around 160 euros.
That's quite unprecedented, right?
It's very unprecedented. I mean, just a few years ago, we talked about 20, 30 euros.
So that's quite some difference. Yeah. And what are the main reasons for this, Olav?
The main reasons is, of course, the scarcity of gas, or the possibility of a Russian export stop, of course, which has pushed up prices since the early winter, since the war, in particularly started in Ukraine. And of course, that is driving into all prices. And if you look at the Nordic market, this has been sort of compounded by low reservoir levels. We came into the winter with we had a very dry winter, and we also had low reservoirs coming into the winter. So coming into May, I think we were close to record lows in certain parts of Norway, where most of the hydropower reservoirs in the Nordic market are located. And that has also pushed up prices, and it sort of triggers imports to the region to meet demands.
And the Russian crisis, or the sanctions on Russia, the cut in flows for both gas and power to some regions in the Nordics have also had a major impact on prices, haven't they?
It has an impact, and particularly if you look at Finland, where Russia stopped in May. They stopped export of electricity to Finland. They also stopped gas exports, and that coincided with the problems of this new Olkiluoto 3 nuclear plant, which was kind of you thought, okay, they will lose the import from Russia, but then they have this new nuclear plant. But then since then, the nuclear plant has not been in operation because they have technical problems, and now the start has been pushed forward to December, the commercial startup, and I think they will start resume tests maybe in July. Late July at the earliest. And of course, there are some worries now in Finland that this could even turn into a security supply crisis next winter if they can't fix the nuclear reactor by then, since they can no longer rely on the Russian electricity imports, which has been very important on cold winter days.
But there are some areas which have much lower prices, aren't there? I mean, I'm thinking in particular northern Norway, northern Sweden, which have maintained, certainly double digits and low double digit prices, and which have, encouraged or are providing an incentive for industry. I know Tasmin will talk later something about, PPA activity, but it's certainly been an area in the Nordic region which has seen a lot of, interest in terms of wind developers, but also industry and tech companies.
Yeah, and if you look at it's almost, you can almost divide Norway and Sweden in two, and you have northern parts of those two countries, and then you have the southern part. And in the north, you have had prices of like 20 euros, down to sometimes close to zero, and that's because there's a lot of hydropower supply, and demand is quite low, and there's also reduced transmission capacity to bring that surplus power to the south. So of course it looks very attractive now for the industry, but it's also quite it's not a huge surplus. I mean, if you build a big hydrogen factory or green steel factories that they plan in northern Sweden, then suddenly this surplus could also disappear.
Turn into a deficit in a few years.
Yeah. So and there has been a debate now in the north that you should not develop the grid any further because we want to keep these small prices because it makes us attractive for the industry.
Yeah.
But what they miss with that argument is that they can have a dry year. They have also this problem, of course, if there are more industry coming, then they sometimes need import as well. So I think over time there will be more equal prices, but it can take a few years. I've seen analysts say that it will take 4 or 5 years. You would still have this, even for 4 or 5 more years, you will have huge area price differences within Scandinavia.
We've talked about this several times on the pod before with other guests, how much of a challenge that is for both the utilities producers as well as companies, but industrial companies. But Andres, if we ask you, we turn to the gas market. That what's happening in the global gas market is essential to everything at the moment, pretty much in energy, but in the wider macroeconomic picture. But are we now facing a mad scramble for LNG in terms of Europe trying to get supplies to cover the coming winter, both to fill storage and primarily in the short term?
Yeah, most certainly. It's not just a question of Europe filling its storage. It's also a question of Asia needing to do exactly the same. We haven't had a really strong competition coming from Asia, but that's going to change, and it will inevitably change. Our analysts tell us that it'll probably happen after summer. So Q4, and it's going to be mad competition. There's no way around it, but that doesn't mean that our LNG supply will come in could be threatened. No, we will still get the LNG. It's just a question of price. It's going to be, to say the least, very expensive. It's going to lead to demand destruction. It already is all over the world. Developing countries, Pakistan today, Thailand announced that it was also cutting its LNG imports. Europe will not. It cannot. It has no choice but to keep importing it. But it will just have to do it at a very, very steep price.
And Thailand and Pakistan, they're reducing imports purely on the basis of price.
Basically, it's demand destruction. It's way too pricey, and it's politically unpopular. But blackouts are the alternative for many developing countries, and even wealthy countries like Thailand. And there's as much as Europe will keep importing, a lot of countries will not be able to import as much LNG. It's happening also in Argentina, which is having a strong winter as we speak. And they're being forced to buy really expensive LNG, and countries are literally going into very steep debts just because Europe is competing very aggressively and will continue to do so.
So as long as you have the money, you get the gas. If you don't have the money, that's it. So and that could create a lot of problems further down the line, and let alone for those countries who need that kind of commodity to keep the lights on. So
that's certainly the case, and you have ricochet effects. Of course, there's more coal burn, but then again, coal is very expensive as well. So blackouts, as I said, are the unfortunate end game for a lot of developing countries. But for Europe, it's going to be a question. We're going to get demand destruction as well. I mean, we cannot turn our gas-fired power plants on at LNG prices. I mean, we're talking about 37 MBTU, which is about 120 euros a megawatt hour. It's priced out. Just LNG is certainly priced out.
Absolutely, Andres. And I think, as we're recording this at the eWorld Trade Fair, which you listeners may hear some of the background hub and the noise. But what I'm hearing here when I'm talking to some people is that there is a fear. Now, Nord Stream 1 is going offline for annual maintenance in a couple of weeks. I think it's the 10th or 12th of July. And there is a fear, strong fear certainly here in Germany, that this pipeline actually won't return. What are you hearing from the analysts that you were talking to?
We get more than the analysts. I mean, we're just getting official versions from both the Russian side. We're getting versions from the German side or the European side. it's being used as a weapon naturally, and this is why we're getting to the extremes where we're getting at, where Germany has to restart its coal-fired plants. Will it be further curtailed? Nord Stream 1? Yeah. I mean, this is in Putin's advantage, to his advantage. This is the moment to do it, not in winter. This is when you want, and if you, by doing simple math, they export half the gas through Nord Stream 1, but prices doubled. So he's getting exactly the same amount of money, just half the gas. It's a game of chicken almost. See who's going to budge first, and in this sense, well, Europe has more trouble coming than presumably Putin does, or Russia would. Russia can survive for longer at this stage. How will Europe cope with this? That's what we're trying to determine at the end of the game. And even we're going to get to a point where there's going to be intra-European competition. Come December, we're going to have a lot more capacity, or some more capacity, especially in Germany, but also in the Netherlands through the floating regasification terminals, and all of our buyers will be competing simultaneously for the same amount of limited LNG, because if Asia's buying and all European buyers are competing as well, will it be? How will we survive that? That's the bottom line question.
Absolutely, and that kind of contravenes what's the solidarity that the EU Commission wants to have in terms of a common platform for gas purchasing. So, it'd be interesting to see how this develops. But Tasmin, if I can turn to you, and, my first question would be, surely green energy would be the answer here. It lessens the dependency on Russia and also aids the move towards net zero, but especially crucial in these very, very tight times.
Yes, exactly. And we've seen from the EU side with their Repower EU program that they have definitely stepped up their ambitions in the renewable expansion. An aim now for 45% of renewable generation by 2030. So there is, and in Germany as well, they've stepped up from a 65% share of renewables to an 80% by 2030. So there is definitely ambition, but it's just letting that being implemented, and how that will translate into policies. And on the PPA side, the government, the EU, European Commission has definitely advised governments that they should unlock regulatory barriers to signing new PPAs, because they are seen as, in this sort of post-subsidy world which we're in, where government subsidies aren't accounting for the larger majority of, or perhaps should not account for the majority of new renewable build-out, given the steep decline in costs of renewables. There is more of a focus on merchant renewable build-out and build-out financed by PPAs.
Absolutely. So have we seen a flurry of activity in the last sort of 6 months, and in which areas, are we seeing the largest amount of developments?
That's a really interesting question, because I've heard very mixed opinions from different participants in terms of PPA activities in renewable procurement, because some have said that corporate strategies are less focused on renewable procurement, given the extreme volatility in power and gas markets. It's really difficult to set a power price for the next 10 years or even 5 years, given the extreme volatility. Probably
even the next 5 weeks, Tasmin, to be fair. Yeah.
Exactly. So how can you negotiate or set a price at a certain level? So that is sort of harming negotiations.
Okay, so the extreme volatility is maybe leading to a hesitation in companies signing long-term deals. So they're withholding until they maybe see the volatility levels drop. Is that what you're saying, Tasmin?
Yes, exactly. And I think the whole uncertain macroeconomic environment is also having an impact. If corporates don't know how their core business will be performing in the next few months, it's very uncertain times. So
absolutely. I mean, what in terms of the length of the deals, given the very high prices, as you mentioned, the volatility, are people looking to secure shorter term power purchase agreements, or are they looking, to hedge on a longer term?
Right. So I think that's an interesting question. On the producer and generator side, there has been sort of more interest in signing shorter PPAs. Before, they had to sign long-term 10-year PPAs, maybe even longer, 15, 20 years, because that was the requirement from the financiers of the renewable project, that they needed this stable income for the next 10, 15 years. But now, given the high market prices, some of them are trying to capture the short-term premium on the forward market for the next 4 or 5 years. So, well, maybe 2 to 3 years on the forward market. So there is a trend in shorter PPAs of maybe up to 5 years, which is something sort of new that we've seen in the last few months and years.
Absolutely. No, that's interesting. And there was a recent story on Montel about how the percentage of deals that actually fail, which was quite interesting, that the vast majority of deals that get started don't actually reach completion. Is that likely to be the case going forward as well, Tasmin?
It's quite difficult to say, but I think we will see it in the new announcements for sure. Whether there will be a slowdown next year, because PPAs take around a year to negotiate. It's a lot to agree on. So yeah, we'll have to see, but perhaps maybe a slowdown in the next year.
Absolutely. I'd like to then sort of take a look forward and see what to discuss with you three. What are going to be the key drivers in the next 6 months? Probably very much so the gas squeeze is going to be most prominent here. But Tasmin, if I can start with you and say, what in renewable energy, in the environmental markets, what are going to be the key movers for the next sort of the rest of this year anyway?
Well, as I mentioned, we've definitely seen increased ambition on the political side. So it will be a factor of getting that implemented and seeing hard concrete policies which will enable the build out of renewable projects, removing the bottlenecks in permitting, and, for example, is a major issue. I think there are a lot of big issues on the supply chain side as a sort of legacy effect from the COVID-19 pandemic, where industrial production was shut down, so components for solar and wind projects. And yeah, the impact of inflation is having a big...
it's increasing costs massively, isn't it? So
yes,
on all sides. And I think it's interesting. Everybody wants. Well, there's certainly huge demand for large-scale solar, for wind, for offshore wind. And everyone's after these parts. I mean, is everybody going to get them?
Right. Well, yeah, that's another thing that is sort of slowing down negotiations and sort of the just general build out of renewable projects. I think it is a concern.
Tasmin, thank you very much. Olav, if I can turn to you and ask you the same question of the key drivers going forward for the rest of the year. Is it all about... Are Nordic players just praying for rain at the moment?
I think they are praying for rain. I mean, they usually don't need to do that in the Nordic region. I mean, everyone who's lived there for a while know that the rain will come. But I think even there, I think the main concern is about what happens in Russia, what happens to Russian gas flows. I think there's also a big eye on the French nuclear plants, which is also very important for the whole price formation in Europe. But of course, if you have enough rain, then the link between Nordic power and European power weakens. So you can have because there's only a certain capacity on the interconnector. So if you have a local oversupply, then you can sort of isolate yourself a little bit more with lower prices. So I think yes, definitely a wet summer would help on the supply situation. And then of course they need to also to fix this new nuclear plant in Finland.
I think that's absolutely crucial, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about the interconnectors? I mean, certainly they've been very important both for Norway as an exporter, but also at times of imports. So how do you expect the flows to pan out for the next 6 months?
Yeah, and they're also quite politically controversial because many politicians want tighter restrictions to make sure that we have enough power at home at all times. I think if you trust the market participants, they will say they are. They will save power over the summer because they know they need to have enough for the winter. So you would expect lower net, maybe net import. If it stays dry, you would have maybe net imports on these cables. From the UK, for example, we've seen quite a lot of import, and surprisingly much import this spring, related to lower local gas prices in the UK than in continental Europe, which has also depressed, or not depressed power prices, but they've made UK power prices less expensive than they were earlier in the year. And that has given some imports. So I think there will be flows will go in both directions. But of course, what happens with these cables is they make it easier to drain the Nordic system quicker and faster. So that's a concern for some people, that also the link to supply security if there isn't enough power available at affordable prices in continental Europe.
And you mentioned how politically controversial it is sometimes with the links to the continent and to other parts of Europe. But at the same time, we at Montel, we write about the imports from the UK. But has that been a part of the national media? Have they looked at that at all? Has that been talked about? That actually the UK and other parts have come to the rescue of Norway at times?
You've had stories, but it's not dominant in the political debate. I think the political debate is more these cables, we are exporting our hydropower to continental Europe, and in return we get continental power prices. That's the debate, social media debates. And that's also lifting these demands from some people to want to restrict export, like having a threshold, for example, for when you can, how low the reservoir levels can be before you are allowed to, you can put a ban on exports if the reservoirs fall below a certain level. What they miss then is that the average price will rise over the year. So it's a bit tricky.
And we've seen, if we stick with the sort of political side of things, a lot of calls for intervention across Europe and re-regulation, and the Nordic region hasn't been immune to that. Do you expect this to maybe the voices and the pressure to grow as we go through the year?
Yeah, they have sort of come around it by handing out compensations, like in Norway and Sweden. Households are given some. They have been given compensation for the house bills without really interfering in the market mechanisms. They just get a rebate, which is financed basically by the state. If this lasts for a long time, then maybe you will have more of a debate, because people know that why should we pay 200 euros when we have a hydropower plant that it only costs a few euro cents to produce. So it doesn't. So I don't think it's publicly acceptable over a long period with these kind of prices.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So, Olav, thank you. And Andres, if we turn to you, so it's all about getting the LNG cargoes in for the next 6 months and overcoming the winter, would you say?
It's that, and of course tied into that picture is storage. I mean, the bottom line: are we going to be able to reach our target on time of filling up European storage to 90% before winter? According to the analysts, yes, we are on track. We should be able to do it. Again, it's a question of price and competition. But that is what where the price debate and the filling ratio let me start again. How quickly we fill, that's going to be determined by that. Ultimately, we have Q4 prices at a very close level. Prices throughout the curve, along the curve, are pretty much along the same level, which means that filling is not being incentivized right now. It is a period of low demand, but if we don't take advantage of summer to fill up our storage, we're going to have a very bad winter. And if temperatures, if we get a beast of the east come again, it's going to be a really tough winter. And storage is going to be the bottom line.
Absolutely. Then you ain't seen nothing yet. I think it's going to be the message there. If we get a beast from the east in the winter, that's going to be very, very hardcore. But if you're saying prices aren't at the moment incentivizing storage. Would you then expect to see more mandatory regulatory intervention to say you have to, this is obligatory, you have to fill the storages before you do anything else?
Certainly. I mean, I think, I think Europe, its policymakers have made it very clear that we need to fill up our storage to a certain level. Why? Simply because we don't know when Russia will cut the rest of the supply, whether it will or not. But we need to be ready. There are obviously millions at stake, not just money, but millions of lives at stake. It's going to be millions of jobs. It's going to be inflation. It's a really bad picture, and we need to be ready for it. And I think that's what it will be if it needs to be mandated. If we need to introduce, if the EU needs to introduce new mechanisms to buy LNG as you mentioned earlier, the solidarity. Yeah, I think the EU will regulate as needed to make sure that Europe is ready for a worst case scenario.
Absolutely, and Tasmin mentioned the supply chain issues. Is that something that also is affecting LNG? I mean, a rush to build these FSRUs, the floating storage and regasification units. Is everybody be able to get these facilities in time, to prevent a further squeeze?
Well, the main issue is not infrastructure at this point. The main issue is whether we have the supply and at what price. But do we have the infrastructure? Sure. I mean, we have enough regasification capacity in Europe. We will be getting more in where we have bottlenecks, specifically, as I said, Germany and the Netherlands. But there are solutions that we could that Europe could implement. And going back to your earlier question, will the European Union could end up intervening? One of the examples is, of course, Spain and France. Spain has the biggest regasification capacity in Europe, yet our ability, or our Spanish ability, to export into France is very, very limited. And what can we do? Well, we can expand that pipeline instead of thinking of Nord Stream 2 or pipelines to or new pipelines to Algeria. We just need to build our interconnection capacity and overcome the resistance that has for decades bogged down these projects. And that would be a quicker solution. But again, it's not infrastructure. It's where will the supply come from? Are we going to have another outage? We're in the middle of the Freeport outage. It's a U.S. plant, one of the biggest ones. It's 20% of U.S. LNG production. That is hurting, and that's why prices on the front end of the curve. That's why they're rising higher. That's why we have backwardation in some of the contracts, because Europe lost about 1 BCM, at least 1 BCM a month, just because of that. Will we get another outage? Will we have a strong hurricane season, as a lot of the weather predictions suggest? All of these factors will weigh in on how much supply we get, and it's not gonna be an infrastructure issue at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, I think let's hope that it rains in the Nordic region, that Nord Stream 1 comes back, and that some of the bottleneck issues are solved as well. So, we've got a very, should we say, a remarkable winter in store. So fingers crossed that it all works on those fronts. But in the meantime, Tasmin, Andres, Olav, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast this week, reviewing the year so far and providing us with a bit of a crystal ball. So thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for this week, listeners, and that's the final podcast ahead of the summer. We'll be taking a break in July, but we'll be back in August. Thank you very much and have a good summer. So, listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.